He pointed and laughed. Right there in front of the entire dealership. What's he going to do? Roll out with a Lamborghini, he mocked. And the salesman laughed with him like hyenas drunk on status. I hadn't even spoken yet. I was just trying to look at a car. A used one. Not even new, but apparently a man in a wheelchair didn't belong on their showroom floor. And right behind him stood the manager. Slick suit. Rolex, gleaming arms folded like he was guarding the gates of heaven. They all looked down at me like I was a stain on their marble tiles. I'm a veteran, retired, decorated. I served in 3 deployments and lost my legs in the 3rd. I don't like talking about it. I moved to this small town hoping for peace, hoping to disappear into quiet days and warmer weather. I don't ask for favors. I don't wear my medals. But today I wanted a car. Something simple. Something that could fit the modified hand controls I needed. So I wheeled myself in, hopeful. And within 10 seconds, I was already the punchline, the man leading the laughter. His name was Trevor. According to his name tag, he was the top sales consultant. He had that smirk you only see on men who think the world owes them applause. Hair gelled, shirt unbuttoned one too far, and an attitude soaked in privilege. Trevor didn't care who you were unless you walked in wearing a Rolex or draped in designer. In his eyes, I was beneath notice, less than... The first blow came when he told me the handicap parking spot was just a suggestion, and that their lot wasn't a rehab center. I ignored it, then came the jokes. We've got wheels for your wheels. We don't do pity discounts. Try Craigslist. The receptionist giggled. The manager didn't blink. I tried to leave, but then Trevor stood in front of my wheelchair and said loudly, "Hold up, don't roll away. You break it. You buy it right." The whole showroom laughed. I sat there frozen. Not because I was shocked. No, I'd seen worse in war zones, but because I realized these men weren't just mocking me. They were representing something much bigger. A society that sees wounded veterans as burdens, that forgets sacrifice the moment it's inconvenient, that thinks respect is optional. That moment, that was the last straw. I went home. Didn't sleep. I started making calls. I recorded everything I remembered. I filed a complaint with the Better Business Bureau, the state ADA Commission, and the local news. But, more importantly, I made one call that would change everything. You see, I'm not just a veteran. I'm also the founder of a private equity group, Freedom Arc Holdings. We specialize in revitalizing veteran-owned businesses investing in community rebuilds and, occasionally, buying companies that forget what respect looks like. 2 weeks later, my team made an anonymous offer to purchase the dealership cash full price. The owner, who'd been looking to retire anyway, took it. The paperwork cleared in 3 days. The following Monday, I rolled back into the showroom. Same floors, same marble, same faces. Trevor was mid-pitch with a couple when he saw me. His smile faded. The manager stiffened. I rolled right past them, straight to the reception desk. "Is the new owner here?" the receptionist asked. "I am," I said calmly. Silence hit the room like a dropped grenade. Trevor laughed nervously. "Wait, you come on." But I didn't flinch. I handed the manager an envelope termination letters for Trevor, the manager, and the receptionist. "This place is under new leadership. Effective immediately. And the first rule I added, looking around, is we respect everyone who walks through that door, especially those who have served." The look on Trevor's face, shock, regret, and finally fear wasn't revenge. It was justice. Within a month, I transformed that dealership into something more. We added wheelchair-accessible entrances, a free shuttle service for disabled vets, and hired 3 former soldiers as part of our new team. The atmosphere changed. Customers started coming because they knew they'd be treated like people, not wallets. One afternoon, a little boy rolled up next to me. He had braces on both legs. His mother whispered, "He's never seen someone like him own a business." I knelt beside him. "We're stronger than they think," I told him. Always remember that. Birds chirp again outside my office window. I hung my old uniform behind my desk, not to show off, but to remind every employee who enters this space why we do what we do. Trevor last. I heard he tried to get a job at another dealership, but no one wanted the lawsuit risk. Maybe he'll learn, maybe not. But as for me, I've found peace. Not the kind you run from fights to get. The kind you earn by standing tall even when you can't stand at all. So, if you're out there being laughed at, judged, or belittled, don't sink, don't shrink, don't snap, rise. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is dignity. You'd think that moment the day I took over the dealership would have brought closure, maybe even joy, but it didn't. Not completely. You see, revenge wears a loud suit, but healing. Healing walks barefoot, quiet slow. And mine had barely begun. The media ran the story for a few days. Disabled veteran buys dealership that mocked him. The headlines made people cheer, share, retweet. But after the news trucks pulled away, after the emails from strangers stopped flooding in, I was still alone in that office, staring at a wall covered in silent medals and certificates that didn't mean a damn thing when I needed a car. I kept thinking about that moment when Trevor blocked my wheelchair, made them all laugh. Not because it hurt, not anymore, but because it reminded me of Afghanistan. 2009. Different place, same look. We were rolling through Helmand when our convoy hit an IED. I woke up hours later to the stench of scorched metal and the sound of my CO screaming. My legs were gone, but the part that hurt most wasn't physical. It was the way some people looked at me when I got back, like I was broken goods, like surviving meant I had failed some invisible test of perfection. And now here I was, successful, wealthy, powerful even, and still being asked to prove my worth. I didn't want to own a car dealership, but I kept it. Not out of spite, but because I had a plan. Something bigger than just firing a bully. I wanted to build something for every vet who'd ever been turned away. I called it Steel Honor, a training initiative. We partnered with garages, vocational schools, and dealerships across the state. I invested in infrastructure ramps, adaptive driving simulators, certification programs. We offered jobs, mentorships, and dignity, but not everyone was happy. A few weeks after the relaunch, I got a call. It was a lawyer. Trevor was suing for wrongful termination, claiming discrimination due to emotional distress. I laughed at first, but the laugh didn't last long. The man was serious, and his attorney, a bulldog named Dylan Greaves, known for flipping narratives, twisting facts until victims looked like villains. Suddenly, I was back in a courtroom, but not as a hero, as a defendant. The media caught wind. The story flipped rich veteran faces lawsuit over firing. I could feel the doubt creeping in through the cracks of public perception. Online trolls started digging into my past. One headline read, "Veteran turned millionaire has a dark side." They posted photos of my old teammates, some who didn't make it home. Someone leaked my VA reports. They called me too unstable to lead. Said PTSD made me dangerous, that I was overcompensating. And worst of all, I started to believe it. I isolated. Stopped going into the office. I watched from a distance as the programs stalled, as my team panicked, as my reputation sank. One night I stared at myself in the mirror, hand trembling, jaw clenched. My reflection didn't blink. It just whispered, "You lost more than your legs." But then she knocked. Literally. My front door. A soft knock past midnight. I rolled over to answer it and found a teenage girl holding a metal lunchbox. "Are you Mr. Hale?" she asked. "I am," I said warily. She smiled shyly. "My brother's one of your trainees, Jamal. He's different now. Happier. He made this for you." She opened the box. Inside was a hand-carved wooden replica of a Jeep painted military green with my name, etched across the door. I choked. That stupid little toy brought me back, reminded me why I started this, reminded me that no matter how loud the world gets real, change starts quiet, so I came back. I returned to the office, cleaned out the dust, rallied the team, hired a PR rep, and then I did something bold. I invited the press, sat in front of the cameras, looked dead into the lens, and told the whole story. From the mockery to the takeover, from the lawsuit to the toy Jeep in a metal lunchbox. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I just told the truth. Raw and real. I didn't come back to fight a man. I said I came back to fight a mindset. One that says service ends at the battlefield. It doesn't. And that changed everything. The segment went viral. Even the networks that had dragged me did a reversal piece. Thousands of vets began writing in. We tripled our enrollment and the lawsuit. It never made it to court. Turns out Trevor's lawyer dropped him when he realized how public the backlash would be. Trevor tried to issue an apology. I didn't accept it, but I didn't fight it either, because by then I had moved on. And steel, honor. It grew, became a statewide network. Then national. I started seeing my brothers and sisters in arms behind counters, under hoods, behind desks, smiling again. Whole again. So now, when I wheel past that spot in the showroom where Trevor once stood laughing, I pause. Not with anger, not even pride, but quiet reverence for the battle that was fought and the peace that was earned, because true power is silent, and respect once reclaimed echoes louder than any mockery ever could. You'd think the storm had passed, that once the media flipped the lawsuit died, and steel honor soared, I could finally exhale. But peace, as I'd learned in combat and in business, is fragile, like a truce signed in pencil. And just when you think the ink has dried, someone grabs an eraser. The betrayal came not from Trevor, not from the trolls or the press. It came from inside. Her name was Clarissa Ung, Co-O, Smart Tactical MBA from Wharton. She'd been with me since the early days of Freedomark Holdings. She understood numbers, contracts, scalability, but what I missed, what I never saw, was how she watched me during the darkest moments, watched me retreat, watched me doubt. And quietly, she began building something behind my back. It started with a board meeting I was never invited to. I found out from Rico, one of our IT guys, who flagged an unauthorized Zoom link connected to a Delaware holding group. Turns out, while I was out rebuilding my reputation, Clarissa had filed paperwork to spin off Steel Honor into a separate nonprofit with herself listed as executive director. Her plan: brand it cleaner. Make it less about veterans, more about workforce transformation. Translation: scrub. The soul, keep the shine. I felt that same sting I did in the dealership, the same heat crawling up my neck. But this time it wasn't mockery. It was theft. Theft of something I built with blood, sweat, and pieces of myself. I could never get back. I confronted her in the office. She didn't deny it. "You were crumbling," she said coolly, arms folded, heels tapping. Someone had to secure the future. I remember staring at her. This woman I trusted, promoted, even defended, when the board questioned her loyalty and realizing something terrifying. She didn't hate veterans. She just didn't care. "It's just business, Marcus," she added. "Don't take it personally. But for people like me, everything is personal." She thought I'd walk. She was wrong. That night I didn't sleep. I pulled up every document, every digital trace I called, every contact from the VA to the Attorney General's office. And slowly I began unraveling her web. You see, while she was rebranding Steel Honor, she'd also siphoned over $400,000 in donor funds to a for-profit consulting firm registered under her cousin's name. The receipts didn't lie, but I didn't go public. Not yet. First, I called the veterans. I organized a silent rally. Hundreds of former soldiers, men and women in wheelchairs with prosthetic service dogs, medals pinned proudly to their chests lined up in front of our headquarters. No signs, no chants, just presence. That day, when Clarissa arrived, her town car had to crawl through a wall of silence. She didn't look up once. Then I dropped the bomb. At our quarterly stakeholders meeting streamed live, I presented the evidence line by line. Wire by wire, I played the audio of her dismissive remarks of her calling us unsellable, of her saying, "Marcus is just a figurehead with a story." By the end, you could hear a pin drop. The board voted unanimously to remove her. She left the building that afternoon in silence. But that wasn't the victory. The real victory came the next morning, when a teenage veteran named Luis, who'd lost both arms in Syria, wheeled into my office with a stylus in his mouth and said, "Sir, I still believe in this." Then he showed me a blueprint for a prosthetic steering column, said he wanted to build it for others like him. I nodded. And that's when I knew Clarissa could steal the logo, the brand, even some of the money. But she could never steal the mission. Steel Honor wasn't built on paperwork. It was built on pain, on purpose, on a promise I made the day I woke up in that field hospital with nothing below my waist. If I survive this, I won't just live, I'll make my life count. And now it was, even with enemies inside the walls, even with ghosts whispering doubt, even with betrayal fresh as blood I didn't break. Because you don't train a soldier to quit. You train him to adapt, advance, and lead. It was the kind of day that smells like something's about to change. Overcast, still the kind of morning where even the birds go quiet. The courthouse loomed in front of me, brick and glass and indifferent history. Inside, a formal hearing awaited called by the State Ethics Commission in response to Clarissa's misuse of nonprofit funds. But this wasn't just about fraud. This was about legacy, about whether Steel Honor would be remembered as a scandal or a revolution. They gave us a modest courtroom, rows of pew-like benches, overhead fans, too slow to cool the heat rising from silent tension. My wheelchair hummed softly as I rolled in. Behind me sat rows of veterans. Some wore uniforms. Some wore T-shirts with grease stains and prosthetics. All of them wore dignity like armor. Clarissa was already seated at the opposite table. Calm, crisp navy suit. Lipstick, the color of old money. Her lawyer, another expensive man in an expensive tie, kept whispering in her ear. She didn't flinch. The chair of the Ethics Committee, a retired judge named Eleanor Bristow, tapped her gavel once. This hearing will examine the accusations filed against Miss Clarissa Eng, pertaining to the misallocation of nonprofit funds and breach of fiduciary duty during her tenure at Steel Honor. There was no jury, just a semicircle of decision-makers old enough to know war, but distant enough to forget its smell. Clarissa's lawyer went first. He was good, too good, turned every accusation into an administrative oversight, painted her as a stabilizing force during the founder's mental decline. He even dared to say my combat injuries may have impaired my judgment. That was the first time I saw Luis seated in the back grip his stylus so tightly it snapped between his teeth. Then it was my turn. I rolled up to the microphone, cleared my throat. I'm not a lawyer. I began. I don't know how to twist timelines or reword theft into strategy, but I know what betrayal feels like. I know what integrity costs, and I know what Steel Honor meant to the people in this room. I pulled out a box. Inside were 50 letters, handwritten testimonials from veterans across the country. I didn't read them all. I just opened the first one and began. Dear Mr. Hale, before your program, I slept in my truck. Now I have a job, a suit, and a reason to live. Then another. You taught me how to use a wrench again, how to use hope again. And another. You didn't just give us work. You gave us back our names. When I looked up, the room was different. The weight had shifted. Eyes had softened. Even Clarissa's attorney stopped scribbling. I continued, voice steady. She tried to steal a mission. Not just money, but meaning she called me a figurehead. Maybe I am. But if that's what it takes to hold a line, I'll wear that name with pride. Because every battlefield has a front. And this right here is one of them. The hearing paused. Deliberations began, 40 minutes of waiting that felt like 40 years. I sat there, hands folded, eyes closed, thinking about that convoy in Helmand, about the pain, the dust, the silence that came after the blast, and then the hand that reached for mine. The medic, the voice that said, "You're not done." Not yet. The door creaked open. Judge Bristow returned, sat, adjusted her glasses. The commission finds Clarissa Eng in breach of ethical conduct. We recommend her permanent removal from any nonprofit leadership roles and full financial restitution of $412,000. Additionally, we will be launching a federal inquiry. There was no applause, just breath. The kind you hold. The kind you finally release when you know the war is over. Clarissa stood up and walked out without a word. I didn't chase. Instead, I turned to Luis and nodded. He grinned, half defiant, half boyish, and raised his half-finished schematic like a flag. It wasn't victory. I felt that night. It was gravity, the kind that pulls you into the earth when everything you've carried finally lets go. I drove out to the edge of town. Just me, the moon, and an old service flag whipping gently from the aerial on my Jeep. I parked near the overlook, the same one I'd avoided for years. The one where the ground was too uneven for a wheelchair too full of ghosts. But tonight I didn't care. I wheeled out anyway. Behind me, the war was over. The fraud exposed. The mission reclaimed. Steel. Honor was back in my hands, but more importantly, it was back in theirs. The veterans. The ones who'd followed me through chaos and concrete. And slowly, with the smoke gone, I began to see clearly. This story was never about a car dealership or a lawsuit or even revenge. It was about restoration, about the long, brutal road between what was broken and what could still be made whole. We rebuilt everything from the inside out. The dealership. It became Steel Honor HQ. The old showroom was gutted and transformed into an adaptive training center. The first of its kind, we added VR simulators for veterans relearning to drive with prosthetics. A machine shop for Luis and his crew to build their own line of accessible vehicle modifications. We called it the Freedom Series, designed by veterans for veterans. The garage where Trevor once sneered, now filled with trainees, gritty, brilliant, driven. I hired mentors like Sergeant Thompson, a former mechanic from Iraq with burn scars down one side of his face, and Michelle Ray, a double amputee who trained 3 new women each week in automotive diagnostics and self-defense. And every Friday we left one service bay empty, not for clients but for anyone walking in off the street. Free repairs for disabled vets, oil changes, brakes, battery, swaps, no questions asked. Some came smiling, some came broken, all left with their heads higher. But the restoration didn't stop there. We created a mobile unit, Steel on Wheels, that traveled from town to town fixing cars for stranded veterans. A documentary team followed us for a year. They filmed everything: interviews, testimonies, tears, triumphs. And when it premiered at the state capitol, the audience rose as one. Not clapping standing, because we weren't just fixing cars. We were fixing faith in institutions, in dignity in each other. Even Trevor, months later, sent a letter. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. He said he'd taken a job volunteering at a veterans shelter. Said he now understood that he wished he hadn't laughed, that he'd carry that moment forever. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. Forgiveness isn't always about answers. Sometimes it's just about ending the war within yourself. And the war in me was over. The final piece of restoration came when the governor himself declared April 17th, Veterans Restoration Day, honoring community efforts led by Steel Honor. They asked me to speak at the ceremony. I almost said no, but Luis stood beside me and said, "You have to not for them, for us." So I did. I rolled onto the stage medals, still unworn, but this time with something more powerful, a folded blueprint in my lap. The Freedom Series schematic fully approved, ready for nationwide release. Behind me, our entire team stood, old boots, new dreams, the ones who never gave up. I spoke quietly. I didn't need volume. I had gravity. We were laughed at. I said, mocked, pushed aside. But here we stand, not out of vengeance, but resilience. This isn't just a program. It's a reminder that service doesn't end in sand or blood or silence. It lives on, in spark plugs, in steel, in every hand reaching for a second chance. The crowd rose again, but this time I didn't lower my head. I looked out, met every gaze, because I was no longer just a veteran. I was a builder, a restorer, a symbol, and symbols don't kneel. They laughed because they saw a man in a wheelchair, but they didn't see the soldier, the strategist, the survivor underneath. They mocked what they assumed was weakness, only to be humbled by the quiet force of dignity and purpose. This story wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming respect, about what happens when someone refuses to stay broken when they turn pain into power. Not for themselves, but for everyone like them. If you're out there feeling dismissed, disrespected, underestimated, don't give up. You are more than the assumptions people place on you. You are more than what was taken from you. And when you stand not on your feet but in your truth, you remind the world that real power doesn't need to shout. It just needs to show up, because the greatest battles aren't always fought overseas. Sometimes they're fought in showrooms, in courtrooms, in boardrooms, in the quiet corners where dignity is tested. So let this be your reminder. You don't need legs to stand tall. You don't need wealth to be worthy, and you don't need permission to rise. If this story moved, you don't let it end here. Subscribe to our channel for more real lifestyle dramas about justice, redemption, and the power of second chances. Leave a comment below. Tell us your story, your thoughts, or just one word. This made you feel? Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that dignity never dies, and heroes come in all forms, because sometimes the smallest voice carries the loudest truth. See you in the next story.